The year was 1834, and David Crockett was enjoying a mixed bag of successes, if you will, both personally and politically. On the personal aspect of things, we see that David had released his autobiography to the public, which was essentially a bestseller, and led to him taking a tour of the big eastern cities for a meet and greet and book signing. But we also see that he was not enjoying so much success politically because he was taking this tour while Congress was in session, and the press slaughtered him for this. So when Crockett got back home to Washington, and once the moon glow had faded away from this elaborate tour of his, he realized that he could not actually spout off against these people who had slandered him in the press, because he had in fact neglected his congressional responsibilities. So he knew because of this he would have a hard road ahead of him, and he decided to unceremoniously leave Congress one day before it adjourned in 1835, because when he got back home to Tennessee, he figured that this extra day's start would give him a leg up on campaigning and mending the political fences that he had broken back home. But Crockett was going to be faced with a tough opponent, a man who was not only a friend of Andrew Jackson and a lawyer to boot, but also a veteran of the Creek Indian War, Adam Huntsman. Now, Adam Huntsman, he was a fairly tough campaigner and had no shortage of barbs to throw at Crockett. And in fact, Huntsman used to his advantage the fact of the matter that he had seen some of the fighting in the Creek Indian War and had lost his right leg, having it replaced with a wooden one. But whereas Huntsman painted his wooden leg as a symbol of courage and bravery, Crockett decided to paint it as a symbol of lechery. And one day, while the two were staying at the house of this farmer who had a lovely daughter, Crockett, who knew Huntsman had an appetite for the lovely ladies, decided to come up with a plan to possibly knock Huntsman's nose out of joint. And that night, while everyone was sound asleep, Crockett grabbed a hold of a chair and made his way down the steps towards where the daughter was staying. And he began to jiggle on the door handle until she awoke and started screaming for her father. At this point, Crockett goes ahead and puts one foot up on the rung of the chair, and he walks like so. And when the father heard this, he mistook the thumping for that of Huntsman trying to make an escape with his wooden leg. And he burst in the door, demanding an explanation. Well, Crockett woke up and intervened as the peacemaker and told the farmer that if he were to vote for Crockett, that he would not have to worry about the likes of Huntsman ever again. Now, whether or not the farmer voted for Crockett, we don't know, and it certainly wouldn't have helped, because once the votes were tallied, Crockett lost by a fairly narrow margin of 252 votes. Thus, feeling that Washington and the United States and the state of Tennessee, no less, had given up on him, he decided to look elsewhere for a new start. Now, Crockett had heard about the lands to the west they called Texas, wherein a fellow could set himself up pretty decently. And Crockett had also stated that if Martin Van Buren were to be elected the next president of the United States, he would leave for Texas, preferring to live under the Mexican rule than the Van Buren administration. And now that he had lost his, what would be his last bid for re-election, we see that he ended up going ahead and biting the bullet, and decided to make his way down to Texas. Now, at the time, it was very common for people who had outlived their credit, were seeking a new start, or simply absconding from justice, to either carve or paint into the doorways of their homes or their cabins the letters GTT, Gone to Texas. And on November 1st, 1835, David Crockett, a man who had a broken family and had lost his job, had scrawled the letters onto his cabin. Crockett had now gone to Texas. Well, folks, we want to thank you so much for joining along as we've discussed the political chapter of Crockett's life. And of course, I'm sure each and every one of you know what chapter is coming up next. But for those of you who don't know, stay tuned to our channel to learn more about the last and final chapter of Crockett's life. We want to thank you again for joining along. And of course, feel free to come on out and support us. And as always, hours of operation and admissions will be listed in the description attached to the video. Until next week, this is Isaac White signing off from the Crockett Tavern Museum, saying goodbye and God bless.